You do something to me, something deep inside. I'm hanging on the wire for love I'll never find. You do something wonderful.
Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Harmonious World. I'm delighted to be joined this week by Alex Webb, whose album British Standard Time has been out for a couple of months now. There's some great tracks on this album with singers such as Joe Harrop, Luca Manning, Tony Momrelle and Carol Thompson. And they're singing all sorts of things, including Give Me the Night, Lullaby of Birdland. My favourite is the Weller classic You Do Something to Me, which Luca Manning sings. The album also features Tony Coffey on soprano, alto and barry sax, Leo Richardson on tenor sax and flute, Andy Davis on trumpet and flugelhorn, who's a force of nature, Nathaniel Cross on trombone, and Jamie McCready on guitar, as well as Flo Moore on electric and acoustic bass, and Sophie Alloway drums and percussion. I'm sure I've missed somebody. It's a huge list of great British jazz musicians. Alex has taken some really classic sort of pop and rock tracks, really. The Very Thought of You, which is lovely, and Mad About the Boy, the Noel Coward track, which Carol Thompson sings absolutely beautifully. So I hope you enjoy listening to my conversation with Alex.
Hi there.
Hey Alex. Hi. So we can talk about British Standard Time. This is a great album.
Thank you.
So tell me how you decided, first of all, how you decided to do it, and then choosing the tracks, choosing the singers, all of that. How did it happen?
Well, it actually came about a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic. Well, I'd been doing some work with the singer Joe Harrop, who features on the album, and I wanted to find a kind of context or some kind of badge for a show with her, because there's a lot of female singers out there. Although Joe is one of the very best, there's a danger of just being another female singer on the scene. So I wanted to have something distinctive about the show, and I had this idea of British repertoire, and that idea has. I'm not the first person has thought of that, but Joe and I sat down and we really looked at it in detail. And one of the things we did was we didn't restrict it to the jazz era or the jazz repertoire. So we were up for including pop songs, songs from the musicals, all that kind of stuff. And of course, it's an amazing wealth of material from the 20s and 30s to the present day. And in fact, the thing was then it's like, what do we leave out? That we had so many ideas. But we started playing that around the jazz clubs and stuff, Joe and I, with some very good musicians. And then the pandemic hit, and of course that really cancelled everything. But Mike Patel of Hampstead Jazz Club, who had some help from the Cultural Recovery Fund, offered to help me make an album of the thing. And so then that kind of rekindled it. And I did a couple of new arrangements and looked at some of the stuff I did with Joe and wrote a couple of new songs and all that kind of stuff. And that's how we put the material together. But with Mike's help, we widened the pool of singers so that we had Joe on a few tracks. We had the great reggae singer Carol Thompson, who I had worked with previously. And she and I had, vaguely talked about doing something together. So that was a chance. Mike brought in Tony Momrelle, who's a great soul singer, but also a superb jazz singer. And then we had a bit of a hiatus. We felt we needed another man. And then I suggested a singer that I'd heard of. I didn't know too much about, but I knew there was a buzz about him, which is Luca Manning, a Scottish guy who's now down in London. And I contacted Luca, and he was up for it. And so we had 4 singers who have all totally distinctive. That was something I think works on the album. I mean, they're unmistakably different from each other. And then we were literally into making the album. Now, one thing I'll say to commend both the singers and the musicians is, we didn't have much rehearsal time. We had a bit of rehearsal, and then we had to go in. The singers, I think the only rehearsal they came around to my place. We ran through the tunes on the piano, and then they had one session each. and they had to nail these songs, and they did it in the old-fashioned way, just like do a few takes and we'll take the best one kind of thing. Really commend the singers. They just did such a good job on those tunes. It's always hard to know how something will be received when you put it out there, and it's a there's a lot of jazz product always being issued and so on, and I think it got really good reviews. And we've just really started gigging it, and we did a gig at Brasserie Toulouse-Lautrec to launch it. We're getting the show back out into the world again, and I hopefully we'll see more of those. Of course, I can't have the 4 singers on the shows at the moment. We're doing it with Carol Thompson and another male singer called Freddie Benedict to cover the male songs. But it's a going concern, and I hopefully we'll every time we're out there, we'll be publicizing the album as well.
I love the choice of songs. I love the Rag and Bone Man, Human. That's a great song.
Well, I thought it was good to try to bring it a bit more up to date. And I think that something I try very hard as an arranger to do is to really make the arrangements work, and in a particular way. So it's a jazz album. It may have, it ranges from obviously jazz standards through to pop songs, but everything on that album is arranged, and I hope is convincing as a piece of jazz. And there's something which may seem a small distinction, but it's quite important to me. There's quite a few bands out there, and some people call it the global jukebox sound, where it's basically you do something crazy like, you play the Sex Pistols as if it's 1920s jazz or whatever. And people have a lot of fun with that. And a lot of the pleasure of that comes from the incongruity of it. What I was trying to do is something different, which is I want people to think that Rag and Bone Man song was a piece of 50s jazz. It just happened to get covered recently by Rag and Bone Man. That's the way around I think it should sound. Similarly with Tony Monrell's singing, Give Me the Night. I want people to listen to that and think, wow, that's a great jazz song. Didn't George Benson do a funk version of that sort of thing? That's how it should sound. So the arrangement and the song should really be tied together like that.
That's a very interesting way of thinking about it, actually, because quite often it happens the other way around, doesn't it? That you hear somebody do something and you then find out that it was written by Dolly Parton or something, and you go, oh, wow, that's weird. And I like that, but there's not, as you say, there's not the incongruity, sort of tongue-in-cheek nature of the other thing, so it's like when you hear Wonderwall done by some random person and it sounds a bit weird.
Yeah. I mean, that's part, I get it, that's part of the pleasure of that thing, but I'm trying to do something that really feels like that kind of 50s 60s jazz sound, which is something I really love, and that it sort of fits really tight with that.
And it's interesting, isn't it, to consider what songs that are being written now will become the standards of tomorrow. I think there are some writers out there. I mean, I like the Paul Weller, You Do Something to Me. That's becoming a standard in a way.
It is. I mean, there are changes. There are kind of technical changes in how songwriting is done now. There's no question that, I mean, in the period of the Great American Songbook, the average pop song was richer harmonically than most pop songs are now. That's just, it was written a different way. You had more chord changes, you had more key changes, you had that kind of musical know-how. And that carries on into some way into pop music of the 60s and 70s. And then it starts to fade a bit. And it's pop music now, and it's not a criticism, it's just a different way of making music. It's much more about the production. Remember years ago, I was working with a male singer who was very keen to do some songs by Prince. When we actually took the song, when we take the song out of the production, there's very little there. They're great records, but there's very little in terms of the skeleton of the song, the chords and stuff. It's very minimal. And that's how pop music tends to get written these days. It's a different approach, but it can make it hard to find things that work as jazz. Someone like Sting still writes solid songs in that classic sense. There's a few of them. Elvis Costello, of course. We do Almost Blue. I'm trying to think of someone more recently. There must be someone. I'm always on the lookout.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Tell me a little bit about your background.
Well, I've done quite a few things, not always involved with music. I've worked a lot in the media and so on, but I have at various times I've worked in venues, in the Band on the Wall in Manchester, the Bass Clef Jazz Club in London, which is the first jazz place in Hoxton back in the late 80s. And then I worked at the Barbican Centre. I've worked a bit in music radio, Radio 3. I've worked in music publishing. So I've seen quite a bit about the business. But for a lot of that time, I was on the side, I was playing or writing music. And then what happened in the last sort of 10, 15 years, the music just got bigger and bigger, and I did more and more things, to the point when for quite a few years now I've been a fully professional musician, which is not the easiest thing. But I seem to be managing. I got through the pandemic by doing a lot more teaching, which like everyone else. But now I think the gig scene has picked up again, and there seems to be a reasonable amount of work out there. I mean, it's never quite enough, but I've got quite a lot going on. I'm also I've done some work in music theatre, and one of my projects is called Cafe Society Swing. It's a kind of music theatre piece about the true story of the first racially mixed venue in New York, which was Cafe Society in Greenwich Village at the end of the 30s. And that's a really good show that's done 3 theatre runs in London, 1 in New York, and I'm negotiating to go back to New York in 2023. It's not a done deal yet, but that's what I'm trying to do. So there's all that going on as well. Yeah, and I do bread and butter gigs in restaurants that you don't know about, that keeps my hand in, that kind of thing. It's you have to have a lot of stuff on the go, I think, as a musician, just to get by.
I spoke to a musician a couple of episodes ago who was booked to do a restaurant gig, and Bernstein turned up. It's like, so they're not always awful, Yeah. I mean, you're not always accompanied by the clink of cutlery on plates, Yeah.
It's funny. Apparently, Earl Hines, the great old jazz pianist, had a thing about, you never know who's going to turn up at a gig. That's why you always have to dress smartly and you always do your best job, because even the most rubbish gig, some important person can turn up.
Yeah.
I tell you what happens now, I think, which is not quite the same thing, but you look up at a gig, might be just a bread and butter gig, and someone's videoing you. That's happening quite a lot. So the worry there is that you never know what's going to turn up on YouTube.
Excellent. Okay, so how is the best way for people to get hold of a copy of this so that the most money goes to the musicians?
Well, as you probably know, Bandcamp. There's a page on Bandcamp for this album, and that's the best way. I believe it's in record shops, if you can find a record shop. If you do buy it on Amazon, please leave a review. But and the other thing is, look out for British Standard Time gigs. There will be more of them this year, and I'll always have albums for sale at the gig, which actually be cheaper for the buyer, and I get more money that way anyway. So, and you can get a signed copy or what have you. So that's my website is alexwebbsongwriter.com. There's a little menu thing, upcoming concert, so you can always see what I'm doing.
Fantastic. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Alex. It's really good to talk to you.
And you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed listening to my conversation with Alex Webb. British Standard Time is out now, and if you follow the links in the show notes, you can find out where the performances are. At the beginning, you were listening to You Do Something To Me, and now this is Rag and Bone Man's Human. Thank you once more for joining me on Harmonious World, and I hope this finds you well. Please do continue to share what you're good at to make this world a better place.
Can you see it clearer, or are you deceived in what you believe? 'Cause I'm only human after all. You're only human after all. Don't put the blame on me. Don't put the blame on me. Some people got the real problem. Some people out of love. Some people think I can solve them. Lord, heavens above.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Harmonious World. My name is Hilary Seabrook, and it's a great delight to bring this series of discussions with musicians and composers and writers and all sorts of people to you. Obviously, there's no point in having a podcast if people aren't listening, and I'm very grateful to my listeners for doing so. Thanks also to Joe English for composing and performing this new theme tune. So wherever you get your podcast, you can leave a review. You can share this with your friends and family, either as a link or on social media and that sort of thing. I'd be really grateful for that. Don't forget that you can subscribe now. There's a link wherever you get your podcasts. So have a great week, and please remember why I started this, which is just to try and make the world a little more harmonious. Thanks for listening to Harmonious World.